You're listening to Behind the Headlines, a weekly news talk show hosted by the Express News Group, publishers of the Southampton Press, the East Hampton Press, the Sag Harbor Express, 27east.com, and Express Magazine, and featuring distinguished journalists from the East End to discuss what's news on the North and South Forks of Long Island. I'm Bill Sutton. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Express News Group. I'm joined today by my co-host, Annette Hinkle. She's the Arts and Living editor for the Express News Group, and she's filling in for Joe Shaw this week, who is once again on vacation.
How does he manage that?
Our panelists this week include Denise Civiletti, editor of Riverhead Local. Hi, Denise.
Hello.
Beth Young, editor and publisher of the East End Beacon. Hi, Beth.
Hello.
And Alec Lewis, who is a staff reporter for Newsday. Hi, Alec.
Hi.
So I thought we would talk about we would start talking about the bird flu epidemic and the number of hundreds and hundreds of dead geese that the towns on the East End have been trying to deal with. It was a pretty bad winter, and they're saying that the frigid temperatures and the freezing over of the different waterways caused these geese to kind of congregate in small areas and thus helped spread the flu and helped kill again a large number of geese, and the towns have been struggling to get rid of them. We had a big story a couple of weeks ago. East Hampton Town trustees had picked up 600 geese and had buried them. We had some dramatic pictures, I think, in the paper of them using heavy equipment to move these carcasses around and bury them. We thought that story was over, but people in East Hampton were concerned that burying the geese wasn't the best way to get rid of the carcasses, that they worried about spreading the disease even further and maybe animals digging them up, that type of thing. We did a follow-up story this week, and the DEC came through and said that the East Hampton Town trustees did everything right, that it was according to state guidance, that the birds were buried 3 feet under. We did a story this week, Southampton Town trustees recognizing the controversy faced by their counterparts in East Hampton, decided to hire a firm to come in and get rid of the geese. So it's pretty bad. What's the situation like up on the North Fork, Beth or Denise?
Yeah, they've been washing up on a lot of bayfront beaches here, in particular. I'm not sure if Denise has seen any reports on the Sound, but I know South Jamesport was very, very bad.
Yeah. Merritt's Pond also had a bunch of dead geese. Yeah.
And
that body of water is small, surrounded by homes that are pretty close to the shore, and it also does not really have great water flow and flushing and stuff. So I don't know what's gonna come of that, but we did have reports of that. It's I keep checking the Ag Department of USDA's data, and there's plenty of avian flu all around again this year.
all across the state, according to the DEC. I imagine most of the Northeast.
Yeah. Talking about flocks of like chickens and egg-laying hens and turkeys and ducks. I checked it shortly when the dead geese were first found. I checked in with Doug Corwin at Crescent Duck Farm, talked to him about how things were going with him and the eggs that
the same strain that wiped out his population. Was it last year or the year before?
It was last year.
Yeah, HPAI last January, and what happens is when it's in the flock, basically the only thing they can do is kill all the birds. I mean, there's no other nothing else a commercial flock owner farmer can do. There's apparently a vaccine, but it's not approved yet in the United States for use in flocks like that. And so anyway, I mean, the eggs that were free, they saved eggs that were free of the influenza last year, and they hatched them, and most of them hatched. and they're, you know, they're they're still alive, and they're also laying eggs, and he's keeping them inside, obviously, and he's extremely cautious about, um, you know, people entering the building, these workers and stuff. He's got a pretty, extensive protocol for that, and he can only hope for the best. He said, if this happens again, I'm done. I can't,
Yeah,
like,
I can't
I'm not going
imagine.
to
Yeah.
do this. So he's, he's nervous, but also, kind of, helpless. So I don't know. I haven't spoken to um poultry farm, the turkey farm, sorry.
Yeah.
Pulaski's. Yeah. Jeez. I haven't talked to them recently, but I'm sure they can't feel any better about this. So um
Well, I
it's,
mean,
it's tough.
hopefully they can keep their birds isolated, but I don't know that that's
Yeah.
always. Certainly didn't help with the duck farm last year. Beth, I mean,
Yeah.
as far as the wild birds, the the geese that are dying, and some other birds too. Concerns there's two concerns, right? That it could somehow be transmitted to your dog if your dog is running free on the beach and comes across one of these birds that somehow it could be picked up. But also the raptors, the eagles and the hawks and all that who might be feeding on on these dead
Yeah.
carcasses and could be transferred to them, right? There's little risk of this transferring to humans, but you want to be careful when you're handling these birds if you're handling them.
Yeah.
The only human cases so far in the United States, anyway, that I know of are people who work in with poultry,
Right.
like in these poultry farms.
There's been 71 human cases in the US and 2 deaths since
Yeah.
2024. So
I
it's
think
not
also
very
out in California,
communicable.
they were getting it from like dairy workers by milking
Right.
cows because it had transferred
Mm.
to mammals. That's when it gets really dangerous.
Right.
So
But
it's
that's
like not exactly casual contact, right? But
Right.
Right. Like these were farm
yeah,
workers who were milking cows that may have had
yeah.
it. Yeah. And then
right. And that's a different strain than the one that's impacting the
yeah, I
wild.
believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Southhold Town just put out a press release earlier this week that they're accepting birds at the transfer station and they'll be composted on site in Cutchogs. According to DEC regulations, however, you compost birds with flu, that's what they're going to be doing.
Yeah,
I think one of the concerns in East Hampton was that they didn't bury them in the landfill, they buried them on the beach, and that
Right.
it's much easier to dig 3 feet down on the beach than it is in,
And it's
solid dirt.
also much easier for that to just wash out with the tide. But I mean, I presume by the time it's washed out with the tide in any storm, at that point the virus might no longer be present. But
the
Maybe.
advice
Yeah.
that the
It's a different look at-
Southampton gave residents this morning at a work session presentation about this is to, use gloves, protect your eyes and your mouth. If you are going to remove these birds from your yard or anything, you can use a shovel to take them and put them in a garbage bag and then triple bag them, and then you could just throw them out in your garbage can if that's what you want to do. It's safe to do that. So, that's the guidance right now, and that's what they're sort of telling people. If you need to do that, keep your pets away and stuff like that. But at this point, it doesn't seem to be. I think more than anything, the images are super shocking for people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's scary to look at that.
It's like something out of a war zone.
yeah, the front page picture you guys put in the East Hampton Press was really chilling.
It was one that was horrible, but a really great shot. We were all very complimentary to Jack Moats who took that photo. It really?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have a photo like that and it just tells the whole story. You don't even need you don't need words after that. It was just really, really there. We had an express sessions last week too, where we had a lot of animal advocates. They were talking a little bit about it, and one thing they said that along your lines, Alec, that that if you are cleaning up these birds and you have animals inside your house, be very careful with your shoes, Don't be, wear a different pair of shoes while you're outside. Take your shoes off before you come inside. You can be tracking that around. I guess the virus, can stay on your clothes for a long time. And your shoes and your animals would pick that up, especially if you have birds inside. Be really very careful about that. Scary stuff. I just want to, comment again about, the uproar in East Hampton, and what we saw was, I think we had good solid reporting from, from us and other publications, but, the concerns just took off, like wildfire on social media, where sometimes there aren't as many facts as there are in regular media, and I think that
Sometimes.
so I'm trying to be nice, but yeah,
Hi.
it was interesting to watch. I mean, there was a real furor,
Mm.
from people that just claiming that the East Hampton trustees were doing a bad job and all that, and they were certainly following DEC guidelines. It seems that they were doing the right thing. Although, as Annette points out, maybe they could have been more selective about where they buried these birds. But when you're dealing with hundreds of 600 birds, I mean, you don't want to be carting them all around town either. I think you want to. It's like when a whale washes ashore. You bury it right there because you don't want to be carrying it around a lot.
You don't want to
Um,
dynamite it. That's what I've been in by.
Good idea.
You're referring, of course, to the
The
town in
famous Oregon
California,
coast
the
blowing up.
famous video that we've all seen of them trying to get rid of a whale carcass by using dynamite and blowing it up, and the result was whale meat spread across the entire town. Was
And
really
falling like meaters, I will
yeah,
add.
exactly. I'm sure it was horrifying at the time, but to watch it now is kind of amusing. If you guys want to Google that, you could Google that. You should sure go
Speaking of
take a look
social
at
Whose
it.
media,
bright idea was that?
That was some
it's probably the radio
government.
stations. No, those crazy 70s ideas for getting listeners.
But Beth, now that the ice has melted, the state is saying that the number of cases probably will start to drop off if they haven't already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, the last I heard, I mean, the DEC got 3 tests back that were non-negative findings, and it took like 3 weeks for them to get that test.
Yeah.
And the way they worded it wasn't these geese have bird flu. It was, we have a non-negative finding. Now we're going to send it. I believe it was to the Department of, was it Agriculture? Do you remember, Denise?
There's a Department of
send it-
Agriculture lab in
Um,
like Iowa.
Yeah.
That's what my colleague
Yeah.
reported.
Yeah.
I guess they're not.
I think that's
More.
on
I guess
testing.
since we talked to the DEC guys that they know what it is, so it's
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
need more testing in a way. And
But
the
also,
bird-
like, the testing of wild animals is
hard.
It comes down to like a lower priority than like
Yeah,
testing
I
for
would say.
public health related things. So that's
Sure.
a struggle, or for livestock.
Domestic. I mean, if it were domestic birds, then obviously you want to
Right.
test
I mean,
them
the
really
flock, when the
quickly.
flock was infected in Aquabog, they came right away, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
oh yeah, the USDA was there. They were all over the place immediately, supervising the culling or
Mhm.
whatever they
so
called
in
it.
the wild east, we're on our own.
Well, hopefully we've seen the worst of that, and the towns will continue their efforts to clean it up so that the beaches won't be covered with dead birds. Um, Transitioning, I guess, kind of the same kind of agriculture outdoors. Denise, you wrote a little bit this week about concerns that Riverhead farmers are having because of the war in the Middle East, war in Iran, that it's going to impact the price of fertilizer as they approach their busy season. That's got to be a
Yeah.
little nerve wracking. You spoke to
Yeah,
Rhode Island Farm Bureau.
spoke to the executive director at the Farm Bureau. I spoke to a company, the head of a company that supplies fertilizer to farmers, the Long Island Cauliflower Association. And I spoke to a farmer that grows primarily corn, which uses a lot of nitrogen. Um, and, they're all still sort of like wait and see what happens mode because it's a little early to really start applying fertilizer still, but just seeing what's happened to the prices of like urea, is that how you pronounce it? But
Sounds right.
yeah, it's a
And that,
major source of nitrogen
so those
fertilizer.
fertilizers come from the Mid East? Is that
Yeah, and they have to pass through the strait, which is, as we know, closed, just like the oil and gas. And that's another major, major concern because, they are very obviously dependent on fuel, both for
sure?
farm operations and shipment of things in and out. And,
It,
things are
it,
just going crazy.
as are the rest of us. I get twice daily updates from my father in Myrtle Beach, who has to text me the price of gasoline as it goes up and down on
You were saying
seemingly
that.
an hourly basis. I'm like, fill your car up. How far do you go? He doesn't go very far at all, but
The scary thing is filling your oil tank for your home when it's still 29 degrees outside.
Oh, I'll
I will
bet.
tell you that. So
Yeah.
that's up over $5.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty expensive before this
Yeah.
happened. So,
Well, and the
I'm
administration is
looking
saying
at
that,
the,
I'm sorry, the
sorry,
administration is saying
Go-
we just have to make some sacrifices right now. We just have to put up with some higher prices that they'll come back down when the war is over, if that ever happens, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're hearing. That's
if
We
the
knew.
war ever ends, or if
yeah.
the prices are going to come down.
If we
Well,
knew, we'd be playing
either
the stock
or.
market right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a couple people I spoke to said, well, things go up, but they don't come down so much once they go up. I mean,
Prices
the gas prices. Yeah, I mean, gas prices, we all remember during the pandemic were
Right.
pretty low. They were under $2 for the first time in a very long time. And then after things got after things opened up again, the inflation skyrocketed and the price of fuel also
Hmm.
went up. But it really went up when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. The prices really skyrocketed then. And they've come down, but not like I was told, not as far as low as they were. Now I didn't document that. I didn't quote
Yeah.
anybody saying that, so I didn't really look into it. But
Now
I
they're
think
looking at the AAA website, their gas prices dot AAA.com, I think it is. Looking at it right now, and in New York, the average price of regular. Yeah, I didn't go to our region here. Wait a minute, but
I
it's
can I have the number
because you
if you
could
want,
break
Denise.
down by the region. The three in New York State, and Nassau, Suffolk is 370 average.
Wow.
A month ago, Nassau, Suffolk, it was 285.
yeah.
So
I mean, I
quite a
think these
hike.
big events, like particularly the invasion of Ukraine, really did a lot to hasten the electric transition in Europe. I mean, a lot of places that were
Hmm.
relying on gas now have heat pump mini split units on the buildings because otherwise the people would have froze. So people can adapt. There are other alternatives at this point, but there's a bit of investment in that. So you got to weigh.
And it's
Well,
not, it doesn't happen overnight either.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
does New York State offer rebates on putting in a heat pump? Just curious. Anybody know?
Not sure what the current status is. There were some LIPA rebates for a little while.
At
I mean,
some point there were, yeah.
but they're very efficient.
Yeah. So Denise, obviously, if the farmers are paying more for fertilizer, we're going to see the effect of that at the
Fertilizer, fuel,
supermarket.
it's gonna affect prices of produce and
Right.
going beyond Long Island, the price of meats and poultry and stuff,
Sure.
because gas is everything everywhere, really. I mean, gasoline and fuel. So it doesn't bode well for the shopping cart.
Yeah.
Well,
um, but
let's hope.
it's like, I mean, I don't mean to like, you know, diminish the concerns that we all have because of expenses, especially around here,
Yeah.
um, with the price of everything already being what it is. But when you put that in the context of what's happening over there
Yeah.
and just, entire like neighborhoods, cities being laid waste by bombs and stuff, it's breathtaking. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's hard to get too worked up about gas prices. I mean,
Well,
for the long term.
And I mean, this is going to affect the price of produce across the board, not just, Long Island produce. I mean,
right.
so,
The price of everything.
I mean, and people are still going to want local corn because it's in the grocery store for 2 days. It does not taste the same. But it's a concern for sure. The New York farmers are really, really pressed with all the wage pressures and everything else that's going on right now.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, I touched on that a little bit in my story, right? I mean, like it's like they're really not in a great spot to begin with, and then you know, with this happening, it's just one more thing that they've got to try to cope with.
We the East End Food Market had a really interesting CSA fair a couple weeks back, and they had a lot of organic and no-till farmers who were talking about their farming methods there. And these are farmers working on very small acreages, like they're sharing farms with other farmers who are using some of these same methods. And a lot of these methods are very low impact, and they work to rebuild this. One of the big things they do is work to rebuild the soil. And I found that very heartening, very encouraging. I mean, a lot of them are young people who are working incredibly hard,
Sure.
even by themselves or with one or two, friends helping out. But these are the kinds of things we're going to need to do going forward.
They're all very passionate about it too, which
Yeah.
is really cool to watch.
Yeah. It's a national security issue. For sure.
You're listening to Behind the Headlines on WLIW-FM. I'm Bill Sutton from the Express News Group. My co-host today is Annette Hinkle from the Express News Group. Panelists today, Denise Civiletti from Riverhead Local, Beth Young, editor and publisher of East End Beacon, and Alec Lewis from Newsday. Alec, you wrote a little bit this week about one of our favorite topics, and that's affordable housing. And we wrote a couple of stories too, but you kind of put it together. You talked about some movement on the affordable housing front that the East End towns have been taking lately. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the different towns and what you reported on.
Yeah, so I mean, East Hampton had a big work session the other day about affordable housing, broaching on a bunch of topics. The one I wrote about and really fixated on it, and also because Riverhead recently did an update on this, is accessory apartments or accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. Those are apartments that are properties with single-family homes. Either they could be in the basement or an attached garage, or could even be detached from a home in a detached garage or a cottage, something of that nature. And so the town of East Hampton is having some significant movement. They're looking to eliminate a ban on second homeowners creating ADUs. Right now, you have to be the primary resident of the property to build an ADU. And officials say that that's really limited where people can build ADUs across town, since in the Hamptons, there are a lot of people and also companies that own homes. So that's one of the things they're trying to do, along with also lowering the minimum lot size requirements to make more properties eligible to build these accessory apartments. That's what they're trying to do across East Hampton. They're also looking at a loan program using their community housing fund, offer about $100,000, up to $100,000 to build a new ADU, and they're also looking at giving homeowners who build ADUs a tax break on their new structure, the added market value for their home. So they're really, really pushing this as an affordable housing solution because there's not really a lot of properties in East Hampton that are really conducive to building high density, affordable housing. So they're looking at strategies like accessory dwelling units to fill the gap of affordable housing out there in East Hampton, especially for the lower and middle class workers. And then also included Riverhead because they recently did an overhaul of their accessory dwelling unit code, and they removed a defunct review board. And I mean, Denise, you can take this over. Riverhead's your territory here if you want.
Um, you probably followed that code more closely than I did when you were working here, Alex. But yeah, I mean, they just adopted it actually Tuesday at the Tuesday board meeting, and they eliminated the accessory apartment review board, and they made it kind of just like an application approval process. But it's many of the same similar things. There's a limit on the size. I think it can be no more than 40% of the principal dwelling on the property, and you know that I mean that sort of thing. It's like not they totally scrapped their previous code and replaced it with this new code.
Yeah. And they increased the maximum allowable size of ADUs too. It was you could only do it from a certain size range. Now they could be a bit larger. Um, and both these towns they have caps on ADUs. Or they had Riverhead changed their cap, but
500 in Riverhead, yeah.
yeah, they now put it to 500. I think it used to be around 250 in the code. It's what I saw. And then with East Hampton, they have it 200 townwide and 40 per school district, just to try to blunt the possible impacts to local schools that new affordable housing might bring. And they're not even close to that. Or they have around 50 and 16 more in development, and that was data used last year. A cap of 200, they want to get to that 200 point.
Right.
And these are really what the initiatives that they're trying to do to make it easier for people to build them.
I think the loans would certainly help if there are people that have thought about building an ADU on their property, but the price point just makes it prohibitive, especially if it's going to be dictated that it's an affordable unit. Then it's that much harder and longer for you to to build your investment back. Unless you're building it for a family member, or that type of thing.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that a lot of the local officials are highlighting for this and really encouraging ADUs, both in Riverhead and in East Hampton, is the fact that these accessory apartments, if you rent them out to somebody, you can, that money, that income can go to your mortgage. Go to your mortgage payment. You can make a little money on the side or to support your family, whatever you need to do to keep you housed in the community. Building an ADU, it will also help pay off that loan if you take out an interest-free loan like East Hampton's proposing to do, or there are other loan programs that the state has. I think it's Plus One ADU is the name of the loan program that the state has launched over the last few years to try to encourage their development. And so it's really part of a strategy that a lot of pro-housing advocates have pushed on Long Island too. Housing Help Inc., which is a nonprofit housing organization on Long Island, they went out, I think it was been 2 years ago now, they went along to all the communities on Long Island, every town basically, and village, and said, please change your ADU policies, make them easier for people to build, create an amnesty program so that new ADUs or people can legalize pre-existing ADUs that haven't gone through the building permit process. Don't charge them for having to apply for a building permit. Don't penalize them for creating housing for a family member or what have you. So it seems like the East End sometimes, at least in this respect, is more receptive to those proposals than some other communities have done. I know a colleague of mine wrote about basement apartments in, I think it was Hempstead, a couple years ago. They rejected a proposal for allowing basement apartments there. So some communities don't embrace it as much, and also New York. Just to add, we had an article about New York City, encouraging ADUs too. So they're really pushing that as an affordable housing solution. Mayor Zoran Mondani has just recently announced initiatives to try to pull those together, those affordable housing initiatives together, and really encourage that as a part of their affordable housing strategy too.
There was a little bit of I don't want to say controversy, but discussion on the board in East Hampton, Alec, about the second homeowner eliminating that ban. That you run the potential of investors coming in and utilizing those regulations for investment money-making properties, that it doesn't necessarily then equate to affordable housing. But I think that they kind of quelled those concerns, didn't they?
Yeah, that's been a concern of Councilwoman Kate Rogers, who's really been the town's sort of like housing guru in a lot of respects. She's been talking a lot about the first the ADUs, and then also short-term rentals in the town too.
Right.
She's been doing a lot of initiatives surrounding that. So she was really worried that this allowing second homeowners to do this, or companies, a lot of these are owned by limited liability companies, allowing them to put in ADUs would allow them to be monetized, make them for profit instead of what they truly should be, which is, affordable housing in her
Right.
argument. I think other town board members.
Is there a cap on the rent if you build an ADU? I mean, there's a cap on the rent, right? I mean, you can only.
So in East Hampton, these ADUs are qualified as affordable housing units. They have to register with the town's housing department, and you have to cap their rents to 130% of the Long Island area median income, which is actually quite a lot of money, thousands of dollars. But also, when you're out in the Hamptons, I mean, is that is that really like a lot of money? I mean, rents out there,
Well, it's a lot of money, but it's cheap rent.
Yeah, it's cheap. It's cheaper than, I think, renting a big
Market
home
rate,
or
yeah.
market rate. So that's really what the other council members sort of told Kate Rogers is, well, we have controls for this. They have to be registered with our housing department. They're going to be monitored by a housing department, and they gotta abide by these income limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And-
I don't think this is the same case in Riverhead, where they have to be designated affordable units. It's not the same, but in East Hampton, at least, that they're looking at this as an affordable housing situation, and this as an affordable housing solution. As Councilman Tom Flight, he's kind of said during the discussion, is, there are a lot of properties that are owned by second homeowners. There are a lot of properties that are owned by companies. And you're really, really limiting where you can put accessory dwelling units and these accessory apartments if you exclude them from the process. And he said, maybe we shouldn't be concerned about stopping affordable housing being built because somebody's going to make money off of it. That's a sort of a
Also-
taboo. Everybody thinks, oh, should affordable housing be a nonprofit sort of endeavor? And I mean, that's an argument that can happen, but at the end of the day, people get into business to make money. So,
Yeah, I think there's a couple different proposals in East Hampton right now about for workforce housing developments. There's certainly Kirby. Somebody help me with
Kirby
his last name.
Marcantonio.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that certainly his motivations are twofold. He hopes to create these developments as an investment, as a development, but he also hopes to provide affordable housing for the workforce. His his friends who are business owners have trouble, maintaining staff because there's no affordable housing, and he's recognized that problem and wants to address that problem. So I think both things can be true. But it's an interesting question that East Hampton is dealing with right now. Do you allow these developers to provide these for-profit workforce housing developments, or should it all be under the town's umbrella?
Well, I mean, it's like the nature of property ownership in East Hampton. I mean, there are it's a very common thing among people who buy property in East Hampton to put it in an LLC, whether they're living there full time or not.
Right.
So if you're saying you can't have LLCs, like, what does that mean? The LLC doesn't necessarily mean you're not here.
Right.
So that can't be the defining factor.
Yeah, I mean,
But
something that I think it was Councilman David Lee said was, well, count me in that category if we're talking about banning property owners, because my parents' housing is in a trust or whatever it might be. That a lot of
Yeah.
people live in housing that's owned by a trust, and that is a company. So so that's part of that as well, and it's just sort of the reality of things out there in East Hampton, where property is scarce for larger affordable housing projects, and East Hampton has been trying to do and move forward these larger affordable housing projects that they could do, these mid-sized rent control things with their housing authority. But at the same time, you got to find property. And would somebody buy up a plot of land and build a mansion or a luxury home and sell that and turn that over for make millions of dollars of profit? Would they want to sell it? Would they rather sell it to the town of East Hampton? I mean,
there was talk for a little while about the East Hampton Housing Trust doing just that, buying up a lot of this property so that the town could use it at some point. I'm not sure if they got off the ground. But one of the things I thought was really interesting from the market study that they were doing through the Long Island Forward Housing Partnership as part of this East Hampton project on Route 114, they said that the population in the census areas that they studied, which included some in Southampton, had increased 26% in the 10 years from 2013 to 2023, but the housing stock had only increased 2%.
yeah. Yeah, that basically measured like from Hampton Bays, or past Hampton Bays, past the Shinnecock
Yeah.
Canal,
Yeah, so it's
east.
really pretty much the South Fork. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
the area
yeah.
where everybody looks at it and says that's the unaffordable part of the South Fork, the Southampton, area where housing's harder to get, housing's harder to buy, and there's a lot more second homes there than there
Yeah.
is in Hampton Bays or
But
Riverhead.
I'm surprised that the housing stock had only gone up 2%, because I mean, it seems like there's a lot of building there, but it's also a lot of people
Lot-
knocking down houses and
A lot
building
of
houses.
knockdowns.
So,
Yeah.
so that's yeah.
And oh my God, that I mean, just like that study, I really want to write an article about just that study itself, because I think it's incredibly fascinating looking at that.
Yeah,
But that the amount of second home, or them being seasonal or second um, homes is more than regular residents, right? I think that was one of the statistics that came up,
right. Yeah. Yeah, and
47%.
this is a really interesting study because it's the first study being done by this new group called the Long Island Forward Housing Partnership, and Greenport Village really wants to do some studying of some properties in the village, and one property outside the village that the town of Southold is giving them a hard time about through this new program, which really provides the market data and a lot of research to help people develop housing where it's going to work.
Mhm.
Because a lot of time in the North Fork in the past, a lot of there's been a lot of controversy about the siting of the most recent housing project, which is now nobody here will build housing here because of the bad taste everybody has in their mouth from this last project that wasn't really cited properly. So the Village of Greenport is really doing some innovative things on this front, and they want to utilize some of the same tools that East Hampton is using. So it's really interesting to see the way the way we're all learning from each other in this process. And I think the Community Housing Fund has really driven that conversation.
I was going to say, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think we talked about them on the last show, but the Community Housing Fund has really raised a lot of money, particularly
$80
for
million.
Southampton and East Hampton, but for Southold as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's really nice to have that pot of money to be able to do things with. I know that Alec mentioned the loans for ADUs. Part of that those are going to come out of Community Housing Fund, and there's just a lot of opportunities for different projects with that money to address. I think ADUs certainly are part of the answer to the housing crisis. I don't think they're the whole answer, but certainly I think I think it helps. I worry about density, and I know that I mean, we've spent 30 years trying to preserve open space and stick to zoning in the towns to protect the environment, and then all of a sudden you're talking about doubling the density on certain number of properties in towns, and I think you need to be careful of that. Certainly, if you can provide a small apartment at an affordable rate, I think that really helps.
Yeah.
And so much of this is already limited by the health department. And I mean, that's another thing with these ADU loans. I mean, so much of that money is just going to be sucked up in most cases by upgrading septic systems in order to allow this to happen.
That helps a lot, right?
Well, I mean, you didn't need a nitrogen reducing septic system 5 years ago. Now you do. So it's a game changer in terms of the cost of development for small scale projects.
Yeah, I know Southampton has just, I think, expanded or is considering expansion of their loan program for IA, which is the septic
Right.
systems.
That's actually, yes, it's actually not a loan. They give you
Which is
a
grants.
grant from the CPF.
Gotcha. Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that they were prioritizing areas closer to the water, and now they're opening it up to more areas. I'm not sure if they weren't. I think they were getting quite a few people from the high, they call them the high priority areas. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the thinking on expanding it was, but it's a tool.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can use it for an ADU.
Yeah. Oh, I'll have to check
Yeah,
that. But
yeah, because it's from this community preservation fund. It might be for an existing house. I'm not sure.
Well, but if you've got an existing house and you upgrade and then build the ADU, then
That's true.
then the ADU is serviced by the upgrade, hopefully.
That's segmentation.
There you go.
And so, I mean, talking about the community housing fund, Southampton recently adopted an overlay zoning district that they're looking to use for individual projects, really prioritizing, that wealthy area that I was just talking about, east of the Shinnecock Canal, for the smaller sort of apartment condominium complexes that they can put in different locations in different neighborhoods or right off highways and such, that larger properties that can fit and hold the higher density project, and give those projects grants to get off the ground. So I think there's now 2 applications at least in progress for those types of projects in Southampton town. And so it's going to be interesting to see how much developers take advantage of those.
Southampton certainly
projects.
needs some more larger developments. I think East Hampton is kind of certainly both towns are behind the gun as far as compared to the need. But I think East Hampton over the last few years, last decade or more, has done a much better job of providing some of those bigger developments, apartments, that type of thing. I think Southampton has fallen behind. Hopefully, with the CHF money, that becomes a little more
That
possible.
overlay code change is going to. I mean, there's like 68 units already in the hopper that are going to benefit from that code change, and that's just what's already being proposed. So it's
Is the project in on Queog, is that affordable, or a portion of that's going to be affordable, right? And that's a huge number of units down there. I think that's
I'm not sure what the number is on that.
yeah. Well, we'll continue to watch that and continue to look for Alex reporting in Newsday. You're listening to Behind the Headlines on WLIWFM. I'm Bill Sutton from the Express News Group. My co-host is Annette Hinkle from the Express News Group. Panelists this week are Denise Civiletti from Riverhead Local, Beth Young from the East End Beacon, and Alec Lewis from Newsday. Another rough transition, Denise. You wrote about a decision in the lawsuit regarding the fatal fire in Riverhead a couple of years ago, that the family of the tenants that perished in that fire had sued Riverhead Town, but this week the judge came in and dismissed the town's obligation, I guess, as part of that suit. It still includes the landlord, but just for the listeners, if you can, just a real brief overview of the fire, what happened there, and then maybe talk a little bit about what happened this week.
Well, it was a horrendous fire in November of 2021, I believe. Right? I don't have it in front of me, but sorry. I'm in which 5 people were members of the same family, a tenant, her daughter, her nephews, and her son were 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 killed in this fire, and they were trapped in this 3rd floor apartment. And there was a lot of there were some conflicting records. It was like a whole tangled case,
As
but
to whether or not that
they.
apartment was legal or not, right?
It was legal, then it wasn't legal. The town kind of went back and forth. Then they granted the owner who lived in the building on the 1st floor a permit for it, but the rental permit was expired and had been expired for a little while, and they had just like issued her justice court violations for not coming in to get that done. So it was all, it was pretty muddy. But in any event, there was this fire that this county police ruled was caused by improperly discarded cigarettes, and the whole house burnt. It was subsequently torn down. It was just destroyed. The people who were killed were burned beyond recognition, and it was just, terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy. But their estates, there were 2 estates that sued the town and the landlord. And now one case is still pending against the town. But in this case that you referred to, the town was granted a summary judgment. What kind of like what you might think of as sort of on a legal technicality. The court didn't rule that the town wasn't negligent or anything like that. It just said that as a government and as a government function, and the fact that they may have incorrectly handled inspections or permits didn't make them liable to the individuals. A government, they don't have they're not acting in a proprietary capacity, and so they don't have a special duty to any particular individual, which may come as a shock to the rest of us, but that's the law, and it is fairly well settled, it seems, for in the state. And so the town won summary judgment, and the case presumably goes on against the landlord. The town, I think, is clearly the entity with the deep pockets, so to speak. It was a blow to, the family members of the people who were killed. So,
They're
I don't know
looking
what else
for
to say.
some sort of justice here.
Yeah, and closure. It's just a really sad thing. I don't know if Alec, do you know? I may not have the dates correct in my head. Yeah, as you know, most things are kind of
It was November
scrambled in my brain these days.
2021, and then
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
I was
Yeah, no,
right.
you were right. You were right.
Okay.
Just
Correct.
a horrible tragedy. We've talked about it a few times
Yeah. Yeah.
on the show.
So,
We'll continue to follow that along. That transitions, I guess, Beth, something that you covered regarding Greenport and their EMS workers that their license was. I'm not.
It's very confusing.
It is. Their license was suspended but not revoked. Is that?
Well, what's happening here? The way EMS generally works on the North Fork, you have volunteer fire department rescue squads. They're affiliated with the fire department. They have volunteer EMTs, and they also have volunteer advanced life support people, but they don't have that many of them because their training requirements are very high. So it's hard to get a volunteer to do that kind of job. Stony Brook Emergency Medicine has two what they call fly cars stationed on the North Fork that respond to all medical calls that come into 911. So they respond every time. So there was a story broke in another news organization up here late on a Friday night saying that this ambulance service had its advanced life support certification removed, which there's a lot of confusion in the public just sort of what that means. This story broke on Saturday morning and we couldn't get confirmation from the health department. They came into work on Monday that it was due to the lack of maintenance of medication on board the ambulance, which is often an issue when you need, like, I'm a EMTB, I'm not a paramedic, so I don't even have access to the ALS drug box on my ambulance because I am not qualified to use those medications. So only the ALS providers can maintain those medications. And if you have a limited number of volunteers who are doing that, they may not be maintained. So we don't know that this is the case, exactly what happened in Greenport, but the big thing that Stony Brook Medicine wants to get the word out about is Stony Brook Medicine has been responding to these calls all along. They respond to every ambulance call that comes across. And if the patient needs ALS care, it will be provided to them on the ambulance by Stony Brook. If they need to go to Peconic Bay Medical Center, they'll go there. They're not only going to Stony Brook hospitals. And this issue with the fire department is an ongoing story. We might have more news by the time this airs. But within the fire department, a couple of members, we're not sure exactly, one or two members had installed a security camera in the truck bay last year and had been suspended. And the fire chiefs are not commenting on how or if this relates to what happened with the medications. So we'll be following up on that. But it's very complicated for the public, and a lot of people are very concerned. They don't know whether they're going to be able to get care. And the big message, even the State Department of Health reached out and just said, please dial 911 as you usually would. Someone will be there. And that's, I think, the big message to get across to people right now.
All right, so we'll keep an eye on East End Beacon for updates to that. But again, big news is if you need help, call 911 and you're going to get the help that you need. We are out of time. I want to thank my co-host Annette Hinkle from the Express News Group, panelist Denise Civiletti from Riverhead Local, Beth Young from the East End Beacon, and Alec Lewis from Newsday. Thank you guys. Great show.